Hi friends, it's Paige and Glue. We are back today to talk a little bit about teeny tiny little roll hems. And today we're going to learn a trick of how to put a very tiny little roll hem into woodgie, sheer, flimsy fabrics like chiffon using no pins and just a little patience. So let's get started. So let's talk about grain lines for a second. If you know about cross grains and selvages and bias and that sort of thing, you can skip ahead to the next chapter. Quick go through for everybody else. So fabric normally is narrower than it is long. So this is the selvage, and that's the side that has a sort of finished little edging that goes along both sides. And then when you get your fabric cut, they're going to cut along this narrower side. So this is the selvage or the grain. And then the side that is cut is the cross grain. And that means that when it's woven, the fibers are going this way and they're going this way. So if you're making something that is a skirt, obviously you're going to cut out your pattern piece. It's going to look something like that. And so your straight of grain is going to be kind of right along this middle part, but you can see when you get to the edge here, that's when your grain starts going into something that we call bias, which means that the cut edge is cutting through the grain and the cross grain of your fabric. So the bias edges are going to stretch, and those fibers can stretch out a little bit as you wear the garment. So before we get to this point where we are putting our hem into our garment, we need to let it to rest and stretch out as much as it's going to. So after you put in all of your long seams going up and down, you want to do something called let it hang. So we'll just hang it on a garment rack or a hanger somewhere in a closet and let those fibers stretch out as much as they're going to, so that we don't have a problem later after we hem it where suddenly our hem is really uneven as those seams have stretched out. So I'd recommend at least 24 hours for that. Is usually a good idea to really let it do whatever it's going to do. So that's the first step. Then you need to mark a even line all the way around. And usually the easiest way to do that is to wear it and to have someone measure from the floor up to where you want it to end, whether that is the floor or a couple inches above, at the knee, whatever. Mark it all the way around and know that that is what you want your finished hem to be. So on this example, I'm just making a hem on this circle that I have cut out of a pretty decent quality poly chiffon here. And this white line you can see is my example of where I want my hem to end up. So I've marked a 1/2 inch in from the cut edge, but know that if this was some sort of flounce or longer circle skirt or something, after you let that hang out, your bias is going to be quite stretched out on something that's cut like a circle. So just know that your line is going to be somewhat wavy as you go around, and that's perfectly normal. So not to be surprised when that happens. So our first step to put a hem into chiffon like this or some sort of other sheer lightweight fabric, we know where we want our line to end up, which is this white line. We are going to stitch a line on our machine a little bit wider than 1/8 of an inch out from that line. I am using a contrasting color thread, which obviously you should not do, just so you can see what I'm doing. And as you're stitching, be mindful not to pull and torque your fabric too much, because you don't want to stretch that bias more than it needs to go through the machine, so that you don't end up with a ripply edge. Okay, so you don't really need to backstitch this either. So now we have our stitched line, which is just outside where we want our hem to end up, and now we are going to go to the iron. Okay, so the first thing we probably want to do is just do a quick press over the whole thing. Make sure your iron is set for the right kind of fabric type you have, so you don't scorch it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use the stitch line that we just did as a turning line. So we're going to turn up our fabric right along that stitch line, and that is going to turn into our folded edge. And having that stitched edge allows us to make a curve with our iron much easier than if we were trying to just do it by hand with some pins. It's a little tedious, but not any more tedious than trying to do this with straight pins, and the results are super worth it. Okay, so we've got our line pressed up along our stitch line, and now we can go back to the sewing machine. Okay, so we have our folded edge. Now we are going back to the sewing machine, and we are going to stitch along that folded edge right at the fold. So like a scant eighth from that edge, really as close as you can get it. And again, make sure not to pull any more than you need to keep that bias from stretching. So here is our edge that has been stitched now twice. We've stitched once and then folded it up and then stitched again right on the fold. And now we need to trim away the excess. And the goal here is to get as much of this little flange cut away as possible without obviously making holes or cutting through our existing stitch line. So again, it's a little tedious, but anything that keeps you from having to do all of this with pins is worth it. Okay, we've got our edge trimmed down as close to that stitch line as we can get it. And now we are going to go back to the iron. We're going to go back to the iron and we're going to press up again right along that new stitch line. All right, so we turn up just along that little cut edge that we just made, and then we use the iron to press it down. This poly chiffon wants to curl a little bit, but you can see how with those stitch lines that we've done, it really is very easy to fold and press that curve back to make a nice even roll. Okay, so we got our last fold in there, and now we can go back to the sewing machine. And now our last step is we're just going to top stitch our hem down one last time. Okay, one last press and we are done. All right, so you can see here, if I had used a red thread, obviously that would have been much more invisible, but for the sake of showing you all what this looks like, here we go. So this hem ended up being just a little bit wider than 1/8 of an inch on the chiffon. There are a couple stitch lines on the back, but again, if that is in the same thread color as your fabric, you're never going to see that. And from the outside, you just have the one stitch line right at the edge of your fabric. And it's a really nice, lightweight, almost invisible finish for your woodgie sheer fabrics, whatever those may be. Okay, that is going to do it for us today, and I hope that this technique is going to help you in the future when you are putting in hems into fussy fabrics like this. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions. See you next time. Okay, well, that is going to do us for today. I hope that that is going to